Oh shit, it's real.
So how is your energy right now heading into continuing this conversation?
My energy is really good today. The sun is shining here in Chicago. I got some good sleep. I've got a date tonight, exciting. It's pretty spacious day. I have a lot of stuff, projects, but like I only really had one meeting so far plus this, and I'm excited for this. Obviously, I'm starting to like look forward to Fridays because of that. It's been a tough week. My dad got out of the hospital, and so he's at home, but he really needs a lot of support. And so I actually stayed out there one night, and and it was really hard. I because when I saw him in the hospital on Sunday, he was in really really bad shape, and I think this is quite germane to our whole vibe, because I've developed enough self-awareness to just know when I'm in a trauma response or just a total fear pattern.
Yeah.
I'm human, and I don't know if anybody can just Jedi mind trick their own nervous system into some other state. Of course, there's all these techniques for that. But yeah, I just really saw myself in that heading out there, because the fear of the unknown, the fear that he was actually in worse shape than he really was, really got to me. But then I got there, and I think one thing I've learned across all sorts of areas is like going into it and seeing what's real and true.
Yeah.
Is almost always better than getting lost in the cloud of fear. So,
well, it's always better, even if it's worse. even if it's worse than you imagined. This is, I think, what is so helpful to people to like have their like whatever mental disorders like diagnosed like by someone that they can sort of go, oh, okay, and you're like, wait, oh, that's worse. You just thought you had mood swings. You literally are being diagnosed with straight up bipolar disorder. And they're like, yeah, but the knowing, like the recognizing and having someone help me evaluate what's actually happening is so calming.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, good. Because you're not bearing both the ideation burden of like, well, then this could be happening and this, and well, and if this turns out this way, then that's going to be hard on her, and then that's going to cascade to, so I got to watch out for this for her, as opposed to getting there and just responding, and then you're like, oh yeah, this is what we're meant for. I mean, listen, this is why the hominids are like a dominant species on the planet, because of this whirling ideation. But it is way calmer to just deal with crisis than it is to like ruminate on crisis.
Yeah, I even learned a coaching technique called the worst case scenario exercise, where I literally just walk somebody through, literally just ask like, what would happen then?
Yeah,
like,
and then what? And then
30 times.
Yeah, love it.
And then some people stop at death, some people go beyond death, and it's just like, well, it's all this other stuff, and it's you like tire out, like wear out that muscle, and it's just like, oh, I guess, yeah, okay. How was your energy, my friend?
Great. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Although mercurial and roller coastery, which is my favorite, because my dad was in town. He lives in California. He was here in Raleigh for like 5 or 6 days. Yeah, so that was great because I love spending time with him. It's awesome. He was also, though, quitting cigarettes while he was here. So he was detoxing for a couple of days, which put him on edge, which gave the energy to air a weird vibe. So then that could get crazy at any time, which is exciting. And then he left this morning, so I was kind of low and sad. Woke up at like 4:45 and got him to the airport. But then I took my kids out for pancakes, took them to IHOP for the first and probably last time of their life, and came home, slept, and then took like a nap for like 2 hours. Woke up, Archie was working out on the porch. And so I woke up, this is reminding me of Burning Man, where like I woke up and within 3.5 minutes, I was on the porch on a yoga mat, stretching and moving and using weights and stuff. So I was like, this is kind of great.
Wow.
Yeah. So then that kind of like, it was great because it kind of was like, it was low and feeling sad and eating pancakes and sort of moping maybe even to some degree and just being present, and then into, okay, reset. Let's go. And I haven't worked out in like 3 weeks because I have this weird tendonitis thing in my elbow. And that's been putting me in a far more precarious emotional state in general, just not having that outlet for again, like burning out, you can burn out your thoughts. I think burning out your body is helpful as well, so as not to produce that same anxiety tendency, you know, or not anxiety, but just like excessive ideation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been hard for me through the Chicago winter. You know, I usually find some way to work out indoors, and I
Yeah.
didn't really do that this winter. So every time it's been 70 degrees, I've sort of dropped everything and got on my bike and
Yeah. Get
looking
outside.
forward to the weather. But wait, there's an important question lurking there. Why the last time for IHOP?
The biggest part for me is it just didn't hit the nostalgia kick that I hoped it would, and I don't know why else kind of to go there. It's almost like McDonald's, like you go there kind of like because they brand it and sell you the nostalgia, but then they change the recipes from when you were kids, and then it doesn't hit it, and you're like, why am I here? Other than the toys, some of the toys actually are way more awesome now than they were when we were kids. They're way better made. But so yeah, I got there, and as soon as I sat down, I was like, oh, unless my kids love this, this might be the last time, because they didn't have all the syrups on the table, like all the like multiple syrups.
Yeah, like the strawberry syrup and
the strawberry, blueberry, butter pecan, old fashioned, and they used to have like reduced sugar or whatever when we were in school. And I was like, that's when I sit down and I have I feel just like I'm already like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be taken care of. I have choice. And I was like, they weren't there. You had to just ask for them. They still brought them all, but I was like, I don't like that. And then I can't drink coffee. So then I was also like, what am I here if I can't drink cheap coffee?
Right. Yes. Having to ask for choice. I hear that. Yeah. And I think we've given up on reduced sugar as a society. So that's probably.
I know. Hopefully, man. Or just they could just bring real maple syrup into the paradigm, but it's not as cost efficient. So yeah, that's where I am. That's where I'm reckoning. Oh, but I wanted to only very briefly talk about the slap to transition. Yes. Maybe we should
speaking of reckoning.
Of reckoning, yeah. So to get back to the conversation, my name is Brendan McNamara.
And I am Andy Swindler. And I don't know why I'm like doing a rainbow every time I say that.
I like it. It gives you a brand, man. That's good. People are gonna see you in public and be like this, and you'd be like, you wouldn't even have to say anything. They could just do this, and you know that they know, and they know that you know that they know, and
it's a little Bill and Ted's.
Simpatico. It totally is.
And when we get a budget, it'll be like we'll do a little CGI. Like
you'll have an actual rainbow effect. Totally. In the slap, I thought it was very interesting. One of the most interesting aspects of it, besides the revelation of rampant racism, which we can talk about in a future episode, was the neglected importance of evaluating that which is objectively true and subjectively true, which relates to our conversation about looking back on vaccine passports. Although vaccine passports still exist in a bunch of different formats, but people kind of pretend like they're gone. But they've at least been lifted from a bunch of the cities who were banning people from going to restaurants for the first time since Jim Crow. One of the things that people, I feel like, didn't evaluate in talking about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, even though, oh my goodness, it got think pieced to death within 24 hours, that very few people were evaluating. They were like, sure, the joke was offensive, but does that mean you should? And I was like, hold on a second. Was the joke offensive is what needs to be regarded. Most people, at least the sources that I regularly return to, people like NPR or whatever, were just like, well, obviously he shouldn't have made that joke. And that joke was offensive because she has alopecia and that's why her hair is short. Okay, that's once you just think that, you're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then you roll on and continue the conversation. But that's not objectively true. So to me, I was like, wait a second, we can have these concerns and protections about people, but we do have to objectively evaluate, was the joke offensive? Because there's this weird both-sidism I love. Some people hate and think it's an evil thing. I think it can be evil and it can be good. I think we should always evaluate, oh, does this side's argument have merit? Oh, good, cool. What parts of it are terrible? Cool, get rid of those. And do the same with the other side. But both-sidism can be lead people astray when it's just like, well, they were frustrated, so obviously there must be some legitimate reason that they were frustrated. The reason that Will Smith was hurt or Jada was hurt in order for him to strike her, but he shouldn't have done this. So they can still say he was more wrong, but we we not only understand why he responded the way, but we recognize its legitimacy. And that to me was the most dangerous part, because the joke made was Jada looking great, G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. That is a 25-year-old joke that has been made every single time an actress shaves their head. Britney Spears shaved her head. I guarantee comics made that joke. It is about women with shaved heads. It is omniracial, and she had a shaved head. It's a shaved head joke. She shaved her head. If you wanted to trace it all back, she has alopecia. She didn't like, I'm assuming, how that made her natural hair uncut look. So she shaved her head. There was no visual things that you could look at her and know that she had, for example, alopecia. But it's not an alopecia joke. It's not an autoimmune joke. You can make those. I have an autoimmune condition, so I can make many autoimmune jokes. Oh man, sorry, I have this messaging. It just keeps pinging my ear, and it is blazingly loud, and I don't know how to shut it off.
Like so loud I can hear it. It's really
it's phenomenally loud. Anyway, so it will not stop. So it was not. Again, people who say, "Oh, we understand why he was offended." I don't see how it was offensive. It was about her shaving her head, which is something she did by choice. We have her on videotape saying she could give 2 Fs, or however she phrased them, paraphrasing her, on video from days before the ceremony, saying, I could care less what people think about my shaved head. It's a shaved head joke. She shaved her head as an willing act, maybe repercussionally from the alopecia thing, but it wasn't like he was making fun of the bald patches on her head, which could be, you could even connect to alopecia. It's a shaved head joke, and she shaved her head. So no, you have no right. You do not have a right to be offended. And this is the cool thing. Just because someone offended, is it offensive? And we have legislation already introduced in Canada and stuff that's starting to be how our society is functioning. And it relates, I think, quite directly to which we can tie in, but we can also, you can talk this left, talk about whatever you want. It does tie into these 2 eras of regard, which is like, I feel like you're dangerous, therefore we're banning you from these places. But then we have to go, okay, well, we have to recognize their fear is valid. We can recognize the fear is valid in terms of their fear is valid. It is a real response. You don't say you're not afraid, right? Okay, you are afraid, you are offended. You have a right to be afraid, but are you right to be afraid are 2 separate conversations. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there's the personal reaction, and then there's like the societal opinion.
And then the actual facts, you know what I mean? The demonstrable, like objective facts about like life, you know what I mean?
I mean, a few things happening. So, one is, I don't know, I haven't followed it too closely. Has Jada actually said anything? I wouldn't blame her if she didn't enter the dialogue.
Really. No, not really.
That'd be the only determinant of actual offense, right, at the personal level.
Yes, exactly. Other than the response, all we have is sort of the hypothesis that Will Will responded because he was laughing in the last shot that we saw on the Oscars. Right. My best guess is if the protective instinct was invoked, he must have looked at her and seen something in her that was genuinely her. That's just my, in terms of trying to rationalize violent action,
Yeah. So that, I think I always ground into something I think we both read a long time ago, the 4 agreements, be impeccable with your word. And my interpretation of that is some form of don't gossip or don't speak of other people. So that, I think I've drawn a pretty healthy boundary of just like, well, I don't know. I can't speak to, nobody should speak to whether or not she was offended. That's her business.
I have no idea. But we can only speak to whether it was offensive or not.
Yes, at a broader level, like that kind of joke, as you're saying, in general over 25 years, or specifically how it may have landed for somebody with that condition in that moment. I think stand-up comedy is the strangest place to impose morality. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it, to be honest. Like I don't know, like I've tried a lot of different times, and I have found a few comics that I like. I respect the hell out of it. I think it's probably one of the hardest things to do to get up there. And you've done it in some fashion or another, or I know you've done a lot of improv, more than I have anyway. So I do respect it, and that doesn't. I don't know. I'm not sure where I land, because I like comics who are equal opportunity offenders. I feel like South Park is in that category where there's like nobody's off. And do I have a personal opinion about most of it crosses my own line because I tend to be really sensitive as an empath, and I tend to not want to hurt people because I feel it too. It's like boomerangs back at me.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one of the reasons I don't like a lot of stand-up, because it's just like, and especially in that environment, it's a constant roast. The whole thing is a roast. They're just roasting everybody. So it is interesting to see where the lines are drawn. And I'm not here to judge that. It's fascinating, like where and why people draw lines. My attention was more drawn to Will's reaction, and I find myself in a funny way being like, was it a slap or a punch? Which is probably like the least important part of the whole thing, and yet that's like, why do we keep calling it a slap? I was noticing folks in this context of more of the broader discussion around racial justice is that the optics of that weren't great in the context of a Black man, slapping another, punching another on a great stage like that. I do agree that was an assault, and so what I heard was they asked him to leave, and then he refused.
Yeah. That was literally, it was bad. I guess someone was highlighting this for me, that it's actual battery.
Okay.
Like assault is literally like.
Thanks for the clarification.
No, I know. I didn't know either. I always thought assault was like anything that you do to hurt another person, but assault is even just like touching another person essentially without their consent or with any sort of malicious intent. That's why when you poke a police officer and they're like, well, that's assault and you're coming in, or what, you know what I mean?
Got it. So so battery's like a step beyond that.
Yeah, like, battery is literally like
it's like that's going to leave a bruise at least.
Yeah, it's a damage. You're seeking to do damage to a person.
Yeah. So, that's troubling. That there really wasn't any recourse. And I'm absolutely empathetic to what I understand of Will's history. I think he has an abusive father and things like that. So that's a lot of my work is like, let's go to the root. Let's look at where this came from.
Yeah. Again,
I don't know for sure, but my assumption might be that he was in that moment having a trauma reaction of some kind. So I have empathy for that. And it's like there's trauma and there's response, and then there's accountability, and the idea that now they're looking into disciplinary things, right? And it feels like just strangely political versus like they don't have security at the Oscars, they just asked him politely and they're like, I'm Will Smith, I'm not leaving. Oh, okay, never mind. It's like, so and I don't know, like part of me is like, well, gee, then he wouldn't have been able to receive his award. And it's like, well, maybe that's a reasonable consequence when you punch somebody at the Oscars.
It's a pretty small one, really. Yeah, consider if you literally slap someone captured on camera internationally, no one's like, we're not sure what happened. Yeah, it's like, no, we saw there was nine cameras on it.
Yeah. So,
but I think, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, and just the optics of, I don't know. I'm sure there's, like you said, we were talking about this before we recorded, but the 24 hours of think piece, and not only is it like old news now, I don't know, 5 days later, but by the time we ever actually get around to posting this, it's going to be like ancient history.
But also this is teaching. I think it's a teaching moment. We should return, even if it's an inconsequential thing. Things like this reveal and have echoes throughout how we deal with all sorts of stuff, because it's very easy to me to paint but I think in this style, so then for me it's easy, and I think you do as well, but like I can absolutely see that people memed the heck out of it, of like, oh, this is this person doing this to this person. I was like, okay, but again, memes or whatever memes are now, like, are illuminative of like, okay, it's not just like a joke of like, oh, isn't that funny? You're like, no, that is kind of Putin. Will Smith is Putin, and Chris Rock is Zelensky. You know what I mean? Putin was offended that he was trying to join NATO, because then if they join NATO, he could put things and hurt and potentially do harm to him. So he had a completely inappropriate response, and then he committed violence against it. You know what I mean? I was like, no, the meme isn't just like a ha, ha, ha. It was like, if it's a good meme, it should tell you, oh yes, we can take this and twist it 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 and learn. Oh wow. So we can learn by talking about this in let's be honest, a very small thing to most of our lives. We can twist it and learn about things that are important and echo and do the work in one place and actually apply it elsewhere, as opposed to just get up to gossip of like, well, because I heard and he thing, and because they haven't been faithful and blah blah. You know what I mean? All that we don't need to. Like, no, what of the stuff we do know? How is that useful to us as humans?
Yeah, and let's make a stand for extending the news cycle on major,
Yeah.
social events like this beyond the social media 24 hours. And I the last thing I'll raise is, one of the most common distractions from what may otherwise be a healthy discussion about racial justice is somebody, often a white person, may bring up black on black crime, as just like, well, they're killing each other, they're hurting each other. So why? And the subjects there, I feel like usually is like, so why should we care? Why should we do anything? Why should we change policies? Why should we whatever? And I'm like, well, yes, that's true, and we could analyze why that may be more true in certain environments where people like have fewer resources and all the things. But I worry, that's my worry, that like, this is going to be like an example of that.
Yeah. Well, people on both sides of this sort of ideological persuasion were pushing that narrative very heavily. That's why I was like, we can talk about that in a future episode, where basically people were like, white people don't talk about this. This is black folks' business. I was like, which is straight up racist. That's racism. And then someone on Fox News was like, oh, it's black on black crime, which is a bad, I don't know if they meant it as a bad joke or whatever. You're like, that's about as cheap as G.I. Jane. That's a 25-year-old joke you're making. And then B, no, it's not black folks' business. Like, Chris Rock is as much part of my tribe as Will Smith is, and Will Smith is much part of my tribe as Flipping Bradley Cooper is. You know what I mean? To me, they're all actors and performers and musicians and blah, blah. So like, they're part of my world. You might consider them like as a separate type of people because they're melanated, but I was like, I don't have to think that way. And I find it very reductionist that both side people were like, oh, we got to identify. This is tribal. Y'all don't talk about this, and you only talk about it this way. And like, I was like, again, I don't understand why we're in the time period of like, I guess in some ways it's good, but it's like the most openly racist time of my life I've ever lived in. Like, people are retreat racism. I think and again, this is both sidisms, that like people are phenomenally anti-white. There are people who are phenomenally anti-black. I think people, because of the internet partially, but also because of this fostered system of we are different than in like some sort of fundamental tribal way. I hear more complaints about people getting flamed with the N-word, black folks getting flamed with the N-word in their comments and stuff. And you're like, I can count on one hand the people who said that word in my company growing up, like until I was like, until I moved to the South, I probably only heard the word like 4 or 5 times, and then I heard it more, but it was literally like one guy, Blaine, I'll tell you his name, Blaine, said the word.
Come on, Blaine.
Blaine. And I was like, other than that, I was like, and when he said it, I was like, well, people say that? Like, say that with the R at the end and everything? You know what I mean? And now you're at a place where like, oh yeah, no, I get called it, whatever, some beauty influencer. It's like, oh yeah, people, I don't say on a weekly basis, certainly come use that word against me to try to hurt my feelings. You're like, what? Why? It's so popular, and it's accepted. Like, people do it in some form or another, like openly and without real repercussion. Anyway, so that part was fascinating. Go ahead. Here, go say on that. No, I want to use this to transition.
Oh, I was going to transition.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I do want to say, we'll tease this out in future episode, episodes. We're going to talk a lot about racism and social justice and all sorts of things, and some different. Once again, the whole point of this, one of the points, other than us just hanging out and having fun, talking about the biggest, hardest things, is to unpack some pretty different perspectives and definitions and things that we have. Racism being one of them. So we'll just teasing that out, future piece. But yeah, I think what you just said is a great segue, because I think it's something related to the who was it? Was it Colbert who coined truthiness? That's coming up for me now. Like, this idea where, like, I don't know. I've always, for most of my career at least, I've really stood for the expansion of voices. Just getting more and more voices out. And I think that's part of what's happening. Like, there is, like, to your point, at least that with that anecdotal data point is like, yeah, I think people do feel more free to just sort of say whatever and then even call that truth. And now we've got this total fragmentation of, well, what is truth and what are facts and what are opinions and what are all the things. And yeah, there's a boldness there that I think, and I don't know how you can retransition if you want, or I could just transition to your transition and then we could just have a whole show full of transition.
Transition to transition. Yeah, it's like jujitsu.
Exactly. I don't know. I say that like I know. But that I think is directly related to coming back to part two anyway of talking about COVID and and the vaccines and the medical apartheid and all of that.
Yeah, well, because and also too, it's the ability to see that people can have the vehemently strong reactions rooted in tribalism, which is certainly part and parcel to like what fueled the thing. But then it's also, again, as relates to the was the joke offensive or not, was essentially like were or are vaccine passports offensive? Now, people, I can say from personal experience that I am, as a person who is specifically excluded, and as they that I am offended by them. But my personal offense, I don't really weigh as very, and that has I'm sure people could be like, you should do some work on that. I don't really weigh my subjective response as that elemental or important. To me, it's about helping me and what I need to pay attention to. But then I pretty much use that to shift into like, well, okay, but I need to evaluate whether that's a legitimate response or not. I mean, that is my response, and no one should invalidate that I'm feeling those feelings or deny that I'm angry or irritated or really honestly just like sad and confused, probably most primarily. But I then have to go, well, but is that, am I right to be offended, or is it genuinely offensive? And I think as we have to look at like what those two potential like fear or concern responses, what parts are legitimate, what parts aren't, in order to figure out. I mean, that helps us figure out the point of view, which is like, oh, my attempt was to blank, right? Let's say for but I don't know, you can speak to it more because I think you are in more spaces where people would have evaluated it in this way. It's like, okay, well, they enacted a vaccine passport, only vaccinated people can come into a restaurant. I can put myself in their brain. They're like, oh, because they thought that would make it less likely that people would come in with COVID and give people COVID. And so, but if that was their premise, their sort of like fear, they're like, oh, I don't want COVID, no COVID, I'm afraid of COVID, then we can evaluate that, and that would not be a legitimate concern because they also ban people who are more protected. And at the time, again, very limited window, small amount of data that vaccines were restricting infection at all. And by the time they enacted them, there was, but again, I don't want to be straw manning here, but let's say that was people's concern. And then with Omicron, as a vaccinated person, most heavily at this point, there's like 12 or 15 data points indicating this, that you're more likely to be infected than an unvaccinated person. So that means you're more likely to bring COVID in and give COVID out. You're personally protected from hospitalization to death for COVID specific only, which is great. But in which case that shifts it. Then it's not about keeping COVID out. It's literally about demanding that people protect themselves against COVID, which to me, I was like, I don't understand how a restaurant could get into that business, why that has anything to do with anything. That's like literally a restaurant being like, do you only use condoms every time you have sex? If you do, you can come in here. If you don't, and you have to prove it. You have to show us pictures.
It's a certain kind of restaurant,
there are. Listen, I'm sure there are restaurants, and I call them
more like LA than Chicago.
I call them San Francisco for sure. Yeah, some parts of New York, I call them restaurants. But anyway, but I don't want to straw man. You know what I mean? I was like, maybe that wasn't the concern, or that wasn't the fear. But that was just like, and that's one attempt of me to try to go, okay, well, if your fear is legitimate, what is your fear? And then what are you trying to do? Like, why did you do this as a fear response? Why would you exclude people out of a fear response? I was like, it must be because you assume they're dangerous or what, and it's so on.
Right.
And so on.
Yeah. And I think, the connection point, I mean, my bias is so deeply in not even just the response itself. Sure. Just the emotion of the response itself. Like that's so much of my work and my own journey is just, I think there's so much wisdom in just knowing that, and it takes practice, years, lifetime of practice, No, because we delude ourselves and we trick ourselves. So I think that the things we layer on top of that eventually become policies and whatnot,
Yeah.
it's all related. So I do appreciate the question of like, it's not, I don't know if I hear you saying like, is the response valid or not? Because who could say if anybody's emotion is valid or not? I don't know if that's it. But what is done from that response? What becomes what comes out of it?
I would say almost like a top and bottom is what I'm saying. Is like, okay, the response. Let's say, for example, sad. Something happens, you get sad. I would not seek to invalidate the fact that you are sad. I will agree. You say you're sad. You feel sad. I go, yes, you feel sad. We fully 100% agree on that. What do you do with your sadness is top almost like output, but the underput has to be like, are you right to be sad? Like, is that a legitimate response, or are you sad because you've misunderstood me? Are you sad because you misunderstand the entire premise? Just like with Jada's offense, is she right to be offended about like a joke which really just says you look like Demi Moore from G.I. Jane 2 and you're going to be in the sequel? Like being compared to Demi Moore, is that right to be offended by that? Is it right to be offended when someone says, hey, you shaved your head just like Demi Moore did, which is just a fact? Like, so let's say she is offended. I don't know if she is offended. Is she right to be? Like, is that appropriate? Like, is that a legitimate response, or is that a completely inappropriate response? Just like, for example, slapping someone in the face for making a joke, I would consider like an inappropriate response. And then what is the thing you did? Like the slapping part, I think it's not appropriate to be offended, and it's not appropriate to slap. So we got to figure out both of those for the sort of fear-based policy. So that just to make that clear, I'm talking about the outcome, but also the input and the output into that point, which I would absolutely recognize as valid. And you, I think, would even better as an empath, like be able to validate to some degree. You're like, no, that's what I feel. But listen, that's also, as an empath, you might be able to question the middle one. People can say, I'm afraid. And you'd be like, that's not what I'm feeling. You know what I mean? As an empath, you actually are part of the system by which you would validate whether someone's emotional response is even real. I'm really sort of mad about this. And you're like, really? I'm feeling a lot of sadness in the room. In which case, you know what I mean? Because I'm not even the perfect arbiter of my own emotional responses. So to just be like, you're rejecting my emotions isn't even a negative thing. You're like, well, what if your emotion is wrong? What if you've misidentified your own emotional response? So I don't know, there's 3 layers, but I think that focusing on the top and the bottom, as opposed to like, I feel afraid in this case, is probably the easiest. But you as an empath might even be like, well, I really like the middle one.
That's like Jedi mind trick territory. We're like, you are not sad. See, I'm going to keep just doing that. I'm going to
keep doing that. It may work. Hey, people tap and tell themselves all sorts of things, and it seems to work. So who knows?
Oh yeah, I'm not deep into that, but no, there are some really, and that gets into like where this stuff lives in our body, which is, that's what's coming up for me. It's I just want to hold it in curiosity, like this idea of if I hear your language correctly, like is it a legitimate response or not? Is it a warranted response or not? Like emotionally, and to me, it like I never find myself asking that question. It's more, like where did that response come from? Because you're, and from one point of view, and this is so common, especially in like emotionally charged situations, from an outside perspective, a lot of times absolutely not, because there's no context, because what really happened was it happened to connect with some piece of trauma or something that happened that even the person who received that doesn't really understand unless they've done a ton of personal work. And then, either there's usually 2 roads. Either there is a response based on that, or it's caught, or it's kind of like, okay, I you know what? I know what's happening here. I recognize this. I need to, I don't know, breathe or leave or, address this in some way, get some space, get some healing, get some whatever. And, just in the context of the nervous system, I was actually just in a training yesterday about this, that there's like three states of the nervous system. There's kind of an advancement of the kind of binary switch of like, well, you're either calm or you're in fight, flight, or freeze. And that it can look a lot of different ways, that one kind of trauma response may look like I'm all of a sudden I'm like cleaning my kitchen furiously.
Yeah.
And really it's to avoid feeling potentially what's happening. And I'm not going to like try to deliver that whole lesson. I'm not qualified to do that. But I'm wondering about that in this moment. Just the idea of, I wonder, when does it become important to evaluate the legitimacy of somebody's emotional response?
Yeah. I mean, I think very infrequently. That's why I typically abandon it, because to me, it's the most, I'm lazy. As much as I like to work in my mind, I consider myself lazier than I could be. So I sometimes, like, if I lack the tools, the evaluative tools, like I can evaluate objectively whether someone should be afraid of an unvaccinated person as a general category. That's an easy thing to evaluate. Whether, for example, it's just like if someone's like crosses the street when they see a black youth of 18 to 21 walking towards them, and they cross the street because of the danger level. We can go and statistically evaluate what level of danger they think it is and whether their response is appropriate. I have crossed the street to avoid when I've ever been with my family, because I enjoy conflict, but I also have to protect my kids. I have absolutely crossed the street to avoid people who at least appear to be schizophrenic, talking to themselves, like swearing loudly, weird gesticulations, at least to me, uncommon gesticulations. You would encounter this more frequently in downtown Los Angeles, because there are people who have been abandoned by the national healthcare system and dropped off in downtown Los Angeles. But like, I try to evaluate who's dangerous. But then if you're doing it purely based on melanation, then we can kind of evaluate statistically, oh, well, what more you didn't when the 18 to 21-year-old less melanated person came. So we can kind of, that's where I can safely figure it out. And then I can just believe that they're afraid. And then I can go, okay, well, your fear was not appropriate. That's like being afraid of like a little newt, a lizard or something. You know what I mean? I believe that you're afraid of this little lizard, but it poses no danger to you. So your fear response is not legitimately about, like you've said, it's not legitimately about this. So let's not pretend it's about this, because once that's a person, then you're doing social harm. You know what I mean? I do social harm, individual and social, because everything we do is eyewitnessed to some degree or another. If I cross the street from said black youth or said person wearing an I'm unvaccinated t-shirt, I don't know how else you would know. If you cross the street to get away from them, you're harming that person. You're telling them a story. It's not, we don't get to just do things in a vacuum. When another person's involved, all of a sudden our responsibility is elevated. So I'm communicating to that person. So I'm teaching that person about themselves in a way that can do them harm. So I'm trying not to do harm. So then to me, it's like, what do? Do you cross the street out of that? But I just feel the safest in being like, your fear response is real. That's real, completely real, not invalidating that. And there's no reason to invalidate it. Let's just accept it. Sure. All right. You were deathly afraid of that unvaccinated young black male. All right. Were you right to? I would say no, and we can get to that. Maybe yes, maybe this is a person you literally know. You're like, no, that's a very specific person who I've watched shoot people in the head. All right, well, there you go. Okay, then I was wrong in my evaluation. But that's objective. I think because those are realms of objectivity, whereas in the subjective, I feel like I just kind of have to come and be with that person in that place, or else I honestly it just leads to too much conflict. So I'm like, let's step out of that into the safe place of, well, what's real and not real, and let's throw away all the things, and then we can come back to that response and then go, oh, okay, well, how can I respond next time with this new information, kind of having gone back and looked at it. So like, no unvaccinated people in this restaurant. Maybe I feel better, and I would believe that. I believe there are people who feel better seeing that sign and knowing there's going to be no unvaccinated people in that restaurant. But then there has to be like, well, that's the same thing that happened in Jim Crow. People felt so much safer when they looked around and didn't see any dark-skinned people. They're like, oh, good, because they're not ready to join society. They're dangerous. You know what I mean? They're a threat to our health. They're a threat to public order, public health, right? There's all the same justifications for any segregation. But then you have to go, well, but is that real? And what damage are you doing to people? And is it worth doing that damage in order for you to like calm yourself? Like, is it okay for me to slap Chris Rock in the face in order to calm myself? Is it okay for me to punch my mailman in his face when he comes to me because he startles me on the front porch? And then be like, oh, okay. Because then what were the underpinnings and what are the overpinnings? But you can't. It's hard to argue that I was mad and freaked out, and so hence I had to punch my mailman. I've never punched my mailman, by the way, yet.
Caveat: don't lift that out of context.
Anyway, that's why I try to safely just stay in the realms of like things we can actually evaluate, I guess.
Right. So one thing that's coming up is like emotions are real, and yet what they're based on might not be real in a objective, tangible sense.
Yeah.
Could you break it down one more time? Because I know I had to hear it a few times. What is your research revealed about why a vaccine mandate in a restaurant doesn't make any sense?
Well, I think in addressing my first assumption based on emotion, because I feel like that's the best way for you and I to talk about it, because I think you have much more literal training and natural inclination towards understanding that emotional response. So I was like, okay, which is great. Even just thinking about talking to you about it has made me think more in that space. I was like, oh, okay, the concern can be objective and subjective, but like the emotional response, let's say, that's why I was thinking about safety, is I think it was intended to, my best understanding, even though it was not super clear when these were issued, is it was like, we're trying to slow the spread of COVID. That in the most simple way, that was the sort of objective data point. I think the subjective data point was, we are trying to make people feel less afraid or feel more safe. So we're going to ban the dangerous people. That was my best understanding of why they were enacted. At the time they were enacted, there was not data to support that. When we looked back, especially once a lot of places, cities were enacting them as Omicron was coming on. And within the first month of Omicron data, before Chicago and Boston enacted theirs at least, vaccines had negative efficacy for infection and transmission. Pretty consistent response of that. So it was a wildly incautious thing. It's similarly incautious to saying you have to wear a cloth mask inside, because what we have in terms of random controlled data points, cloth masks at least have a potential to be conductive of infection. That means if people wear cloth masks, you're likely to have, not definite, but you're likely to have more infections than if no one was wearing cloth masks. Likewise, if people are vaccinated, the more people you have vaccinated, the more Omicron infections you're going to get. That's why Omicron had a high R naught, or basically that's the number of people that are likely to be infected from a single person. So it wasn't protective from a COVID perspective in terms of it's going to make less people get COVID. So to me, that immediately put it out of the realm, just in that's just one idea of why they did it. So that immediately took it out of the realm of an objectively safe thing, and it put it in the realm of a subjectively calming thing. In which case it's decided to essentially victimize, segregate people from society in order to calm other people. So that's essentially hierarchical, and it's based on invented categories from 2021. Again, I've said this to you, it's this is like watching the invention of race. This didn't exist before 2021, the idea of referring to someone as unvaccinated or unvaccinated with a capital as though it's an identifier. But we invented it and enacted segregation in 1 year. So it's and I would say in general, we shouldn't do that as a species. It's or certainly not without, I would say, a preponderance of evidence, an overwhelming amount of evidence that the people we are excluding are legitimately dangerous. If we found out all of a sudden that Guatemalan males from 18 to 21 were 90% likely to commit a homicide every 24 hours. And you're like, all right, well, we've got to ban those particular age I know there are angry Guatemalans out there. I just picked you at random. I just like how it's fun to say Guatemalan. Guatemalan. See, it's fun. But we would have to have data points that were phenomenally salient as to danger before we excluded people.
Right. So we agree that race is a social construct. You spoke to that.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing here is that the vaccine is not a social construct. That is objective. You're vaccinated or you're not.
Right.
But the impact on transmission,
Yeah.
it's and therefore the impact, the belief system around that
Yeah.
translates to the likelihood of somebody being afraid. That then becomes a social construct.
Sure. Well, even the category is a social construct, just like melanation. Melanation is real. I would contend that race is not.
Right.
The categories of vaccinated and unvaccinated are not real. Vaccines are a product, but because they function completely differently to every single person they're injected into, and they have, at least at the moment, all cause harm likely. We literally don't know. We don't know if they're more harm than good. So they're not. So they're so minutely specific. I mean, it's so much less relevant than even melanation, right? Which has also its consequences. That it's almost like people with like long, whatever, like their middle finger is like higher than some people's, or middle toe is higher. It's almost like that level of
Right.
of difference, even in its fundament. But yeah, but essentially, yes, those are the only little like tweaks. And I'm like, well, I'll just flick that piece of dust off.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
And no, and I think I said this maybe in the last one. Yeah, actually, I think we kind of landed here. You know, when you've helped me see that. You know, I feel like I was more like the the frog boiling that doesn't think to jump out until it's too late. You know, being vaccinated, eating at some of these restaurants, being like, well, yeah, gee, I mean, that seems logical. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like, personally, I wasn't offended being around with somebody who wasn't vaccinated. And yet it somehow became more acceptable when it was like, oh, well, there's a bigger construct around this, like a restaurant or a city, like somebody, and I'm like, I don't know what authority a restaurant has, in the medical space, but, for some reason that became, they're like, oh yeah, sure. Like, I guess they're just trying to, like, protect their people. And that, I think, is, I'm often trying to figure out the motivation. And I think that is largely true, right? Like, I mean, my God, I don't know, we can figure out, try to determine which industry had the worst time during the pandemic, but restaurants are certainly near the top of that list.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of empathy for them. I'm like, oh my God, they've just been trying to survive. Many didn't make it. And it's extraordinarily hard. And so I think, like, at a motivation level, they're just like, we're just trying to get by. We're just trying to stay open. We're just trying to do what we need to do, probably to get more customers in here and to be safe. I'm guessing that's the motivation for a lot of restaurants. And yeah, like, based on your research, I mean, maybe it's like, it doesn't necessarily stand to scientific reasoning that their motivation was rooted in actually making people safer. And then if their motivation is only connected to making people feel safer or be less afraid, then literally, coming right back to segregation.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, is that, and how do we evaluate, especially we were talking about, like, not letting the news cycle die. Okay, we got to look back and be like, was that appropriate? And that's especially because that's literally how science works, right? Especially any retrospective study is like, oh, okay, did those things function? And throughout 2021, we've been looking at those, right? You're like, okay, we have 2020 and 2021 now. You got to, like, turn around and go, okay, did that work? Especially in terms of public policy that has led to the most divisive tribalistic time in my public witness. Then you go, okay, well, we caused all these tribalistic divisions. Like, we caused these to rise up and created these categories and foster these categories, especially as, like, supervisory bodies of the nation and state and city did. Were these things functional? And if they were, then we go, okay, cool, let's hold on to those the next time we need them. If they're not, you need to apologize, because you did a lot of damage. Like, we're in that period now where, and if you don't apologize, then that damage remains forever. You know what I mean? It's almost like having, because then you can be like, oh, hey, Emancipation Proclamation, but you never say slavery is evil. You're all free, but you never said this. But that's, I mean, this is why the Emancipation Proclamation is a fantastic document. I mean, Lincoln's a good writer, so whoever was writing that, it was well edited. But it literally, trying to get rid of slavery was all about, like, this is a grave evil. It's not just like, oh, we've got to stop doing this. We're done with this, which is basically what's happened with passport removal. They're like, oh, okay, we're not segregating anymore. That's done now. And then people are just walking away. And people are like, oh, okay, cool. No, what do you mean cool? No, you can't just if it didn't, especially if it didn't do anything with it, which it didn't, nor did you have evidence that it would have, then we have to publicly acknowledge, it, or this is going to be a festering wound forever. Because listen, we abolished slavery however many hundreds of years ago with that full recognition. This is evil. That was the whole thing. This is evil. This is a moral evil. This is unethical and wounding and terrible. And even with that acknowledgement, we suffer from the effects of it 4 generations, 5 generations, whatever. It depends how fast you breed. Anywhere from like up to 8 or 9 generations later, you know?
Yeah, you're right. And I've learned a lot about in the last year. A friend of mine did a hunger strike around the bill for reparations, HR 41, I believe. And that's been on the books for 30 years.
Yeah, they just passed the anti-lynching law,
yeah.
like last week.
No, the ERA hasn't even been ratified in every state. That's 100 years. I'm like, whoa, democracy moves real slow.
Well, except when it's trying to hurt people.
Well,
then it moved. That's the thing though. It's not as a non-democratic process. So our democratic republic moves fundamentally, hugely fast to invent a category and execute public segregation. I mean, we're really good at effing ished up and being mean to people. Then all of a sudden we're like, let's do it.
I think you said when trying to hurt people. So that to me is like war. We're trying to hurt people.
Yeah.
I truly believe, and I don't, the machinations of politics, who knows what people's individual motivations are. But I believe in this case, a lot of people thought they were trying to protect people. Yeah. And what you keep rooting us in is like, and you may or may not believe that, I do. Because of this version of science, this thing that wasn't really connected to the reality of the numbers that are either we're aware now or either we're aware then or especially are aware now. And I think this word reckoning, keeps coming up. And I was even thinking in the last week that people talk in business about the Great Resignation, like 40% of people leave the workforce and all this. And I would rather be calling it the Great Reckoning, like because we haven't really addressed that sin of slavery. We haven't really owned it, I think, as a nation, and let alone led to any kind of reparations, whatever that could look like. And I like a lot of things where there's that much loss. There is no really making whole, but there is a process of reckoning and owning it and apologizing and making remunerations financially, and then more importantly, actually changing the systems that are still in place that reflect.
Yeah, and if that's how long that took, I mean, my goodness gracious. And literally, I mean, if slavery hasn't sort of been paid for since it was paid for in blood, even though it was intermingled with other things, that the most people died in a war in U.S. history fighting over what eventually led to basically abolishing slavery. You know what I mean? So it's like, man, if you can shed that much blood, that many people dying to accomplish it, still isn't enough to essentially, I mean, this gets straight up Christian, to pay for, that's not enough blood to pay for the sin, ultimately the transgression that was, that's a literal, I mean, it's a biblical, that slavery in America was a biblical sin worthy of death. So in some ways you're like, as Christian, I'm like, yeah, it's perfectly appropriate that many people died. And I would love to count, actually, has anyone ever done that? Like measured, like body count in terms of how many people died, like in the Civil War versus how many people were put in the ground being treated as though inhuman. But I was like, if that doesn't do it, then I was like, what is this going to do socially? You know what I mean? If there hasn't been there's been almost no pushback on a new segregation other than Black Lives Matter in New York for like a week since vaccine passports were knowingly, and there's no way, this is the thing why I'm saying people did harm on purpose. Lockdowns were not a thing that was a wise idea. It was not something that was sort of in the playbook beforehand. It was potentially a fear response, but since it didn't work, we know at this point it caused far more harm than good and did almost no good in terms of limiting overall infections. It just sort of like slowed them down for a short amount of time, but it did, almost certain here. We know for certain it cost more lives than it did. So to me, I was like, that seems so, I mean, I'm not allowed to use this word in my house. My kids are home, but dumb. So it's like, I guess my thing is, I don't believe people are that dumb. So that's why I say this is actively harmful, because I was like, I have access to New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? These are just like mainstream, highly vaunted publications. And it would shock me if people in government didn't have all the information I had, plus more. Plus, that's their whole job to make these evaluations. Whereas I'm also like a full-time parent and trying to write some children's books, and you know what I mean. I'm up to a whole bunch of stuff. So they never provided information to support. They never provide evidence to support these policies. So for me, I can't logically assume that they were actually trying to protect anyone, because I don't see evidence of it. So that's why I constantly say, I was like, oh, like restaurants were killed on purpose. I don't know why, but that's certainly what happened. There was no reason to shut businesses down for 3 months and 6 months. It didn't do anything. We knew ahead of time it wasn't going to, and then they did it, and then it didn't. So to me, it'd be wildly unreasonable to assume good intent of something that didn't have reason to do it and then didn't have a good consequence. But I understand you're a far more magnanimous person than I am.
Well, I think I'm gonna go to Men in Black here. I mean, a person is smart. People are dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. The collective.
Yeah, I think we were entangled in a deep collective energy of fear and freeze. I mean, and going back to that response piece, and I don't know. I guess again, like I'm not only did I buy into a lot of that narrative at the time, but it also kind of fits my version of, you know, logic or common sense or something. In this way, it is a kind of common sense, but maybe we could put sense in quotes. It's common, and I think you're questioning the sense of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, even now, I'm like, well, how could isolation not help with preventing spread, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're literally like in our houses locked up. Now I actually think this could be a good segue into the social isolation and some of the other devastating impacts.
Yeah.
But that I'm holding, I was like, like why? I mean, why wouldn't that?
That would, no, functionally it would, as long as you did it permanently. But so then if we lived that way forever, then it would have a positive effect. But we can't, that's again, it's just like, it's an inhuman effect. And it's going to kill, we don't, at the time too, we still didn't know what the IFR, what the infection fatality rate of COVID was that perfectly once lockdowns were enacted. Isolation has killed so many more, like it amplified excess deaths to a staggering degree. Literally, you know, opioid deaths are now the number one cause of deaths for whatever is it, like 18 to 45. That was not, it was in the top 10, you know what I mean? It was a bad one, but it wasn't number one. So isolation absolutely is part of that. Alcohol deaths are in the hundreds of thousands. A Johns Hopkins study last year estimates that the unemployment related, which kind of goes into a bunch of those things, will probably be over 1 million. So over 1 million people are going to die because of what we did policy wise. Is their sort of best. It's a modeling study, you know. So what are you going to do? But there's hundreds of thousands, certainly, people who died because of we just have to stay away from each other. Again, I've often likened it to your stove gets set on fire. You know what I mean? You're like, oh no, the oil gets set on fire, and you freak out and you just start reaching around and grabbing dishes and throwing dishes at it and smashing all the dishes, and you pick up the dog and throw the dog at it, and the dog burns up in the fire, and you reach over and try to pat it out, and your hand gets burned, and then you run out, and then, you know, maybe finally eventually the fire goes out, or it just kind of goes out by itself. A virus gonna virus.
And then you jump on the internet and you see ways to put out the stove on your fire.
Yeah, and by that time it's out. But at that point, like what we saw publicly is people were like, look what the virus did. Look what this fire did to my dog. Look what this fire did to my plates. Look what this fire did to my hands. It was like, no, you did all that. We've done phenomenal amounts of damage to ourselves and others. But based on that, this is the thing I've reckoned better with talking to you about it, based on potentially a fear response. Talking to you and my friend Ross, let me know that there are people who are afraid of SARS-CoV-2. I will tell you right now, I was unaware until 2021 that anyone was particularly afraid of SARS-CoV-2. I was afraid of it for 2 weeks. I was the only person talking about it. I talked about it with my friends. No one ever said, "Oh yeah, me too." I was like, as far as I was aware, I was probably like the most freaked out and paranoid person, and I was afraid for 2 weeks. But until I talked to you guys, and you're like, "Well, I think so many people are afraid," and I did a poll on my Instagram.
Right.
Yeah, I did a poll on my Instagram, and 95% of people are not afraid at the time I did it in whatever late 2021. But something like 55 or 60% of people said they had been previously afraid. So I didn't know these people existed. To me, it was all just media stuff being like, "Oh, look how afraid these people are." And I was like, you want people to be afraid because that's how they click. We know fear sells advertising. That is just like a generally accepted truth, at least in my generation. They were like, "Oh, fear and doubt." You know what I mean? Fear of like being left out, fear of not being someone having sex with you. I mean, that's just like all of advertising. So of course the media thrives on selling advertising and selling clicks and you watching them. So it's like, they're going to sell fear because that's what they all have always done throughout all time and history. So I was like, oh, the media's trying to make you afraid. But I mean, who gets afraid because the media freaking tells you afraid? Like, I didn't know there were people like that. But you guys both illuminated me. You were like, I don't know where you live. But so maybe you're around people who had a fear response, because this is why I was especially agitated about vaccine passports, because I was like, who is this even going to calm down? Like, I don't know any of those people. I don't know. I have never even seen a scared person. So are you responding to your imagination about that people are actually like scared of this in a way that like has any relevance to existence? And both you and he, my friend Ross, were like, this will calm people down. Yes, people are genuinely afraid. So maybe you can speak to that experience, that people who are afraid of the.
I'm glad we got here again, because oh my Lord, like, I'm gonna really pick my explodey head charades very, very, very carefully, very selectively. It's mind-blowing. Like this, I think a lot of what we're fascinated by are this all kinds of segregations, right, and sort of distinctions and bubbles that we live in, and this is astonishing to me. I mean, it's very personal. I mentioned that a lot of the even reason I got a vaccine was the fear of both of my parents, and my kind of like, well, sure, if that is gonna help you personally, and then sure, I guess at the time it makes enough sense that that's a good thing to do. So that's very close and personal in that way.
Yeah.
And then just I know in the circles I'm in, I don't imagine we could do it now, but it'd be even interesting. I mean, I live in Chicago. It's a very liberal city in general. I'd be fascinated to even cross-reference that with other kinds of demographics, like who is afraid, who is afraid, and why. And it would, again, like, it would be logical for me, but you stand in contradiction to this, like, oh, maybe somebody who's immunocompromised, maybe somebody who's elderly, maybe somebody who's there's a reason. I mean, beneath this, and I guess we could weave this in a little, is like a fear of death, which in and of itself is totally irrational, because that's the only thing that's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
And yet, I don't know if I'm completely not afraid of death, but
I
think I'm ready for it. I think I'm open to it.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm not like terrified. I mean, there's other things that it's funny. I don't know. I'd say a lot of the fear in my life is more like a low burner, like just kind of like
a buzzing,
and just at a pure like emotional level. I remember one training it, we're like, look, I mean, we're all somewhat afraid all the time. I mean, fear is technically the emotion that reminds us to like look both ways before we cross the street. Like it's very useful in a lot of ways at a low burn level.
Oh, it's super helpful.
And I've been getting into rock climbing, and I always like to have a human holding the rope and belaying me, but there's this auto belay thing, this little machine that's like a flywheel, and it'll catch you, but there's like maybe half a second of free fall before the flywheel kicks in. And man, it scares me shitless. Like I'm there, and of course my niece is just jumping off and doing all the things, and I'm like at the top, I don't know, 60 feet up or something, and or 80, I don't know, different ones, but like, and it's just amazing. And I turned it into like this like self-coaching exercise where I'm just like, isn't this fear amazing? Like,
it really is.
It's not rational. And I'm looking at the little sticker that says this machine was certified. Like, and it's like, I haven't looked into it. Maybe I should be like look into their actual, if they have a death record at all. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I assume if they're in use in a public facility, even though yes, we all sign waivers and we know there's a risk, but like I assume it's pretty dang safe, because they, you know, you just hook yourself in. They're not even really relying on any kind of advanced training or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet I am like clinging there and
Yeah.
just knowing. And the interesting thing is, this does really relate, because I'm getting better at it. So this is a PSA that you can work on fear. You can
Yes.
get better at it. You can
Yeah.
step through it. And also what happens, what has happened a couple times, especially I think the first time I did it, was if I cling too long, I mean, my strength will wane and I will legitimately fall.
Yep.
And not only do I prove that the machine works when I fall, because that's what it's actually designed for, falling is worse than essentially rappelling or abseiling back down.
Yeah. Controlled fall. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a controlled fall. If it's an uncontrolled fall, I have caused a couple of minor injuries. I mean, at minimum, an extraordinarily amount of clumsiness and you know, probably embarrassment if anybody had it on video. But then in a couple of, you know, ways, I've just landed wrong on my foot or something. So nothing major, but you know, I'm like using that to look at fear and the impact of not being able to step through fear. But it really at a visceral level, this is like, it's rare that I'm in a position. I'm not afraid of heights. I don't know. There's a lot of things I'm maybe even too cavalier about, and not that seem like they should be rational fears. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But for some reason, this is like the closest I've gotten to that. Oh God, just physiological terror and sweaty palms and all of it. And I really, truly believe that's what a lot of people have felt about COVID.
Yeah, that's it. Well, see, that's so interesting. So to me, I guess this has been my big revelation, is that that you know people who have been afraid. So then some people, I still don't know. I mean, to me, I don't know what the percentage of people who are afraid is, but that they must exist. You as an empath, you know them, and you've been around it, so you know that people were genuinely afraid. So that was a nice revelation. The nice revelation, just to kind of go, oh, okay, well, that makes a little more sense that they acted irrationally. But then the irrational thing has been a revelation to me in a sad way, that I was like, I would, at least most people I have interacted with, but again, this might be my own bubble, most people I've interacted with are irrational people, who are people who don't find reason, evidence, like rationally assessing things really relevant to their existence. And that has produced in me a fear response similar to falling. Because I was like, oh, when people get irrational, then they're dangerous. You know what I mean? Irrational people, I would say, are fundamentally dangerous. Those are the kind of people I do cross the street to avoid, because I can, sometimes you can see someone's irrational if they're punching invisible things. Either they can see things I don't see, which is, I'm an imaginative person, an actor. It's certainly a possibility they're fighting invisible demons. But they appear to be irrational, in which case I need to get away from them. So it's so funny that like people's fear response to a brand new kind of thing that I've never seen before. Like I've seen people be afraid of falling. I've never seen someone be afraid of a virus in public my entire life. I'm 43 years old. So it's a brand new thing that all of a sudden it's this new thing people are afraid of. And then not having had many dozens, hundreds at this point, hundreds of conversations with people about their concerns or the ways and means by which we measure these concerns. And maybe 7 people or something who I've spoken to have been like I've been able to have a rational conversation. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, well, let's evaluate. So many people do seem to respond sort of almost verbally, violently, or they'll say talking points that I can tell they've heard because people say the same things or whatever. So those are the two kind of revelations. But maybe returning to the fear thing, if that was a motivation for segregation, what was the motivation for fear for people who were in your like proximity or purview?
Why we're like going back to the, I don't know, probably like the first lockdown, like back. Just why were people afraid of COVID?
Oh, like in your world, you were saying that there was like people who were afraid. I was like, what were they afraid of? Because early on, like we're talking early 2020, pre-lockdown, it looked like there was at least a potential that the R naught was much higher than flu, but the IFR was maybe twice flu or something like that. So then the worst flu year was around 81,000 or so. Like 2016, 17 was a really nasty, I think it was that year. It was a really nasty like flu death year. But like by April, before lockdowns happened, like it was like, oh, but if it's only 2 to 3 times that, I mean, 300,000 people are going to die or whatever. But we already knew that like it was pretty attenuated based on, we already knew vitamin D stuff. We already knew body mass stuff. We already knew elderly stuff. So it really puts people who could be reasonably afraid in a pretty small category. But even those people, even the CDC data, you know what I mean? It was like, the IFR never really maxed out when they were doing a general one beyond 0.64. And we had data too that like less than 1% of people who get COVID are hospitalized. So it was like, that's low risk. Whereas that same thing, you're like, why am I so afraid when I have this thing tethered? But like someone falling from 60 to 80 feet, I think you have a pretty high percentage chance of being hospitalized. You know what I mean? Like that's a legitimate, I think that percentage of hospitalization or medical care needed falling from 60 to 80 feet, I'm going to put you in the like 80 plus range. You know what I mean? Whereas with the virus, we're talking less than 1% certainly. So then for general pop, but that was like, you knew people who were specifically afraid. And I was like, so I'd love to know why they were afraid.
It's a great question. My mind goes to my mom because I think she was the one who I perceived as being afraid, and then reacting to that in the sense of, oh, let's get the vaccine appointments and all that. I mean, I think that was just straight up like mama bear stuff. Like, I don't want my boys to get sick, don't want my boys to die, and husband, you know, just pure like protect the family from everything, from all the things. You know, so there wasn't even a specific, which I'm, you know, to the extent I can imagine how that fear played out in other places. Similarly, I assume it was similar. Just, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get hospitalized. I don't want to die. I don't know. I mean, I have viewed it as a kind of privilege that I haven't known a lot of people have been deeply affected by COVID until pretty recently. One of my co-founders has it for the last few weeks, and it's bad, which is a really respiratory condition. And that's something you've reminded me of in our conversations. And it's worth repeating because, you know, you're not looking at this from the point of view of that it's not a problem or that COVID isn't real.
No, it's that's the crazy thing, right? Yeah, all the vaccine passports went away. It's still a problem. There was no reason to do it. There's no reason to take them away if the reasons you did it were legitimate. So to me, that was helpful because it was like, to me, confessing that this was never a real thing. So yeah, no, it's absolutely a problem too. Some people are severe and neurologically affected. There's some blood-borne elements. There's some neurological stuff. I mean, when it hits you terribly. I mean, just like many viruses, influenza can do the same thing. Influenza can kill, you know, a phenomenal number of vulnerable people, especially. But yeah, it was like, no, it's a legitimate threat.
Well, and so it's interesting now. My perception now is that, you know, I think this happened again around Omicron because it, you know, and it's funny for those of us who don't dig deep. It's just kind of like, you know, you look at a chart and it's like, I'm not even sure what that chart says, but there's a big spike. That's bad. You know, like we should all just freeze. Like this big game of freeze, basically. But in the last month, I mean, basically, the vaccine mandates were lifted here in Chicago exactly a month ago. And so it's been a month of kind of evaluating that or trying to sense into that. Now, I think people are deeply traumatized from all of this. And basically, I perceive that showing up as anger, which I generally view as kind of a more cover emotion. And I see that in the way people drive, and I just sense that tension and energy in all the ways. And I think for a few of the reasons you mentioned, particularly economically, like, and I think that's these other effects from how we reacted to this situation, to how we reacted to COVID, that's creating incredibly long-lasting trauma, right, for folks. And I think economically is one of them. And in the groups I'm in, I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, my dad has health challenges, and so in some ways, like that is still very real. Like to the extent of like they have really needed to bring care providers into the house, and that was a bit of a hard discussion to navigate. And it finally just kind of got to the point of like, and you've helped with this because you've helped me kind of come closer to like, not that this isn't legitimate, but that maybe fear, maybe just guarding against everything in total isolation from fear isn't the answer.
Sure.
And so they have this week, they've like brought in more help, and I'm seeing that at a very visceral level because so much has landed on my mom, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe bringing some folks in to the house increases some risk, but it also has all of these incredible positive impacts because now like she's getting that help. And my brother and I had talked about this because we're like, well, like a lot of folks in Chicago, like we're kind of out and about now and at events and things. And some people have just bursted back out. I've been a little more creeping back out, or being a little selective, but life is kind of back, in this way here after many months of either it was the segregation or the lockdown or whatever it was. And so I am sensing less fear right now related to COVID.
Which is fascinating, right? Because it's not a reduction of public danger. It's a, and this is the part, again, I think is frightening. It's a conveyance of information thing. Again, and this is wild too, because now I've watched a whole new set of people be like, oh, the CDC is an absolutely political and corrupt organization, because the people who have been diligently protecting themselves saw the same thing I did, which is the CDC literally overnight changed the metrics they used to decide what was high and low. And so people who are diligent are now freaking out because they're like, what? No, wait, you can't just change the paradigm. And then of course, people like myself, since 2020, I was like, oh, they don't care at all. I'm not surprised. And I'm glad you're on board now. But all the people who like believed in, so to me, anyone who enacted like a segregation, if they're not freaking out right now, I'm astonished. Anybody who's not who stopped wearing a mask because the mandate went away, I was like, okay, those people, to me, that is, every single one of those people is declaring a massive, and I've looked at it because view, massive trauma response, because that's not remotely rational. Doing something just because someone told you to do it, who in general, especially, and again, this leads me to interesting thing that I thought, I can't remember how you brought this up, but it seemed like I was like, you sometimes connected this to think about people having a fear response. My whole thing is, since the fear for a lot of people wasn't legitimate, then I was like, well, that doesn't seem rational. I was like, my best guess was it's like a hate anger response. They were mad at the government for shutting them down. They feel like they can't take it out on the government because the government will just fine them. So then they're like, give us someone to take this out on. And I've seen this too in the pattern of the creation of the other, the unvaccinated. There's a great article in the New England Journal of Medicine called "In the Name of Public Health." This is how, and I know people think this is Godwin's law and you shouldn't bring it up, but I think you're wrong. I think Nazis are a great example. This is how segregation in Nazi Germany was enacted. It was, at first, it was like declaring these people a public health threat, that they're more like they're transmitting particular diseases, and othering, and this was weaponizing the hate that Germany felt because of their economic circumstance and because of the difficulty of the mismanagement of the government in the previous World War, and then the sort of impositions of the European Union, not unified at the time, but around them. And they were like, we're mad as hell. And Hitler and the Nazi Party were super smart. They were like, okay, cool, blame them. Let's blame them. And so all of that hate gets directed and weaponized. And we've seen that in our country, where Biden publicly talked about it and talked about the unvaccinated as though they weren't patriotic. People who have opposed and mandates in schools and whatnot have literally been labeled domestic terrorists by Surgeon General, the Jen Psaki. Biden has suggested they're not patriotic and they're not doing their part, and they're people who don't care. They're dangerous people. And they're a new category. They have a U, uppercase U. And the Attorney General also, and it's been It's literally creating categories of hate in order to direct the ire that should be directed towards your government. Like any restaurant who shut down, who shut you down, man? It was like it wasn't the virus. The virus didn't. This is the thing that's drove me crazy for 2 years. Newspapers keep being like the pandemic. You know, the damage of the pandemic. Pandemic just means a virus that's over multiple continents or countries. So the pandemic never shut a single restaurant down. I've never heard of a single anecdote where someone's like, oh, well, we all got COVID and we couldn't go to work. You're like, no, even if you all got COVID and you still could have gone to work, but then there were policies in place that said you couldn't. And then your business shut down, not because the virus hurt your business. The business shut down because the government said you have to close your business and no one can go inside of it. So I was like, go ahead. And again, to me, this is like the beating your kid up because your husband beats you up. You know what I mean? Mom punching your kids in the face because her husband punches her in the face, kind of a thing. So this is what I constantly wrangle with especially before I started considering that people were legitimately afraid. But I still don't know why your mom was afraid. Like, what was she afraid? Like, why was she afraid? Has she been, but then this is my question. Is she generally afraid? Like, is she afraid every influenza season? Does she want you to get flu shots every year? Is she afraid of again, this is like a small risk thing. You know what I mean? Like, is she afraid of others? She lets you rock climb, you know what I mean? And I don't know if she freaks out about that and it's like, you have to do that in a particular way or whatever, but.
I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe generally, I mean, even that, there's always a tone of like, be careful and, you know, like,
yeah.
All the things. And
yeah, that's mom job stuff.
Yeah. I'm like, you know, I mean, like, sometimes I can feel overbearing, but most of the time I just land in like, oh, gee, aren't I glad to have a mom who cares? That's cool.
She loves you.
Don't have that, right? And you know, loves me and expresses it. So I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question. Maybe I'll go ask her. But one thing about your language is, maybe pandemic is sort of the right term. I'm with you that like saying like, oh, the virus did this. No.
Yeah.
But the pandemic is a little more expansive. That could include, in fact, I'm kind of questioning the linguistics of like pandemonia. Like that's this larger kind of chaos and reaction at scale. You know, has had all these other impacts. There's I mentioned that, you know, I'm involved with a lot of mutual aid networks, and, you know, these tend to be off-grid, anti-institutional, anarchist, you know, and, you know, and actually one of my colleagues, I guess, comrades, as we say, in one of the communities that helps with support houseless neighbors, you know, was mentioning, I wasn't aware of this, but, you know, a lot of it's just on like a chat thread, which isn't even as advanced. I mean, I know we loved iMessage because it was like, at least you could do more threading and stuff like that. And and I think it's just so limiting to have lots of people trying to have a conversation like one thread. It's just
my gosh.
And she was telling me, like, I sort of remember catching a little whiff of this, but she was like in it, wise enough not to step in it, but she was witnessing it. And it was like basically got to like this total level of just violent speech against the two sides. Because I think what emerged was like, well, you know, maybe initially kind of a reasonable discussion about like, well, how do we want to handle being careful and being safe in the context of working with populations who don't have a lot of resources. They're living on the street for the most part, and they, you know, maybe they're vaccinated, maybe they don't have masks, maybe they, you know, this and that and the other. But it quickly descended into the ideological divide and, oh my God, and if you're not vaccinated, I'm paraphrasing because I wasn't even there, but like, yeah, just you're evil incarnate, you're the problem, you're all the things, right? And that's another thing you've mentioned that's worth repeating, is just that the bullying is not really to be equivocated. That because I kind of imagined it was. I was like, well, it's just one of those things where people pick their sides and everybody's going to be an asshole or whatever. And and it's like, you know, and like a lot of things I've been just paying closer attention to. It's like, I'm not sure that's true. It seems like the folks, but maybe there's a through line. I mean, if fear leads somebody to get vaccinated, then I think fear is also at the root of that bullying. And really it doesn't justify it, but it's at the root of you're the problem, you're evil, because I'm fucking terrified And making you the problem makes my life just seems all slightly easier.
Yeah, I have someone to blame. The weird thing to me though is that, like, how would you transition into the other by buying a product? I mean, this to me, this takes branding identification so far, where it's literally like you hate Pepsi drinkers when you're a Coke drinker or whatever. You know what I mean? I think that's the thing I can't get to in like.
You know how many Apple
places.
posters I have in my house? I mean, what are you talking about?
I know, but you would never be like, you keep buying Dells. You're part of you know what I mean? You're damaging society. That part is pretty fascinating. And especially when, again, we have evidence that, like, if it's about limiting COVID spread, the vaccinated people are more dangerous. You know what I mean? So then if they're afraid, they should be more afraid of vaccinated people if it's just about being around COVID. So then it's not even a rational invention to defray that that anxiety. Oh, but what I want to ask you, because you were talking about houseless people or unhoused people, however you refer to it, that was a big thing that came up online, at least in sort of the Twitter world that I live in, especially in Canada, who did a bunch of different cities in Canada did vaccine restrictions even earlier than we did. And they were like, one of the biggest problems here that we're seeing is winter is here. Canadian winters are brutal. People can't go into Starbucks and use the bathroom. You know what I mean? Can't go in and can't go in and they've got enough money to get a hot cup of coffee and which means they can use the bathroom or whatever, and to get out of the flipping cold for a little bit because all the actual institutional places are closed. You know what I mean? So these are literal kind of like life-saving things we're talking about. And so it was phenomenally biased against the unhoused. In general, vaccine passports, we knew before any of them were enacted. This is why Black Lives Matter was out protesting, when New York was the first to enact them. It was like they were disproportionately affecting melanated people, especially Black and Hispanic. And then it was disproportionately affecting poor people. So you put that up, you're literally going Black folks, brown folks, poor people, and then this new category of unvaccinated people, you're not welcome here. And you're in spaces that are specifically directed towards welcoming every single one of those categories. So I think that was fascinating to me when you're like, oh yeah, no, it's not really being discussed in our spaces. When I'm like, and this is one of those tribal things where I was like, oh, I would have assumed you guys would be wrestling with this the most overtly because it relates tangentially to everything y'all were up to. So it's amazing to me that it's even in those spaces, it became this disruptive thing, or that people just were accepting of it. They're like, oh, well, yeah, whatever. A few more people will die this year because an unvaccinated, unhoused person can't walk into a place and buy a cup of cheap coffee at Dunkin' Donuts and use the bathroom,
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of the folks, I'm guessing, a lot of the folks on that chat were rooted in compassion. I mean, that's what I see a lot, and that's the spots I hang out. It's a deep. Oh, and we could flag this for a future episode. Even harm reduction. I remember we touched briefly at one point on in our texts about providing safe needles, providing safe ways for people to do things that
to harm themselves.
We could objectively say, well, that's not good. So we'll flag that. But and I do language alert. It's a thing. It just became a thing. Houseless, unhoused. I kind of use them interchangeably. I leaned a little more towards houseless, largely because it is less of a departure from homeless. And I think, it's easier for people to kind of connect the dots. My understanding is that the logic behind that is that just because somebody's living in a tent on the street doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a home. So it's a nuance, a distinction. Now, here's the interesting thing. I have yet to have a discussion with anybody who is houseless about that terminology. And
we definitely, let's stick a big flag in that. That is, I think, one of the most hilarious phenomenons of modern semantics.
Yeah. Oh my. And yeah, that could be rich because actually just this week, there was a really amazing dinner. So here in Chicago, we have boards and they have older men or older people.
Yeah.
And one of them hosted a dinner earlier this week. It was really beautiful because it was bringing together a lot of the different folks and groups like our mutual aid group that work with houseless neighbors, and inviting the neighbors themselves. And it just felt so it felt odd in the best way. It felt like, wow, isn't this so odd that we're sitting here next to these, our neighbors and breaking bread and actually having an open discussion and actually listening to them. And one of the labels for one of the groups there is, I think the Chicago Union for the Homeless, right? So
yeah,
I'm just always curious about that. Like when did we start using different terminology and why?
Yeah.
And was it the folks in that condition, or was it the folks,
yeah.
sort of working on that? So yeah, we'll flag that. Let's see. Did I get to your question?
I don't know, but it was interesting. But no, but even that, the nomenclature relates to, like, I don't discuss myself as an unvaccinated person. I don't think vaccinated or unvaccinated they are not relevant categories for SARS-CoV-2. Immune or non-immune? No, you could sell me on that. Are immune? Okay, and then if you wanted to assess risk or whatever, like if let's say your mom's super afraid, right, and she's older, you know what I mean, so she's in a higher risk category. Her risk of COVID infection, could be close to the 5.6 or whatever. I don't know exactly how old she is, but let's say she's in like a 65 plus category, in which case you're like, oh, all right, you're in a multi-digit. It's like 3 to 5%, right? She gets a vaccine, it drops it, relatively speaking, from 4 to 3. So her risk is not the people who are most at risk. It's a massive reduction in terms of, like, going from 4 to 3 is a huge mathematical shift. But in terms of your day-to-day existence, I've never understood how vaccination would make anyone at high risk feel calm. I mean, just to me, because I'm not a math person. So if her risk was, let's say, 5.6 before she gets a vaccine, maximum, that's going to take the sort of absolute risk reduction takes her down to a 4.6, right? She's still at a 4.6. That doesn't seem different to me as a person. You know what I mean? I'm just like, that's still a scary time. But anyway, but if she wanted to evaluate people coming in, like to help your dad or whatever, like vaccination, unvaccination, not a relevant question. So therefore not appropriate. That's like basically saying, are they black or white? Not a relevant question. So then, but immune or non-immune, I think you can argue that. I think that would be a salient thing for her to at least consider. I still say, I don't know what you're freaking out about. If you're as protected as you're going to be, are you going to do this your whole life? If you're not going to do it your whole life, why do it now? But that would make a huge difference. If you're non-immune and you're COVID naive, then your chances of infection are, at least after Omicron, maybe, would have been a risk in terms of bringing COVID in. But like having a vaccine, she would either want someone who had natural immunity or someone who was unvaccinated to come into the house. You would not want a vaccinated person currently if Omicron is the dominant thing. You know what I mean? So that's why I think that was a relevant category, but it's an invention, and nobody asked the vaccinated if they wanted to be called vaccinated. No one asked the unvaccinated if they wanted to be called that category. The same way we throw around anti-vax, when I was like, you better ask people. Again, this is like, the thing you're talking about. Did we ever ask the homeless whether they cared about this? Or the whole Latinx thing, I think, is the perfect example where people find it, but more people find it offensive. People are offended by it, and yet it's still on NPR every day, just saying literally things are offensive to the people you're talking about.
I have a friend in Brazil who's like, what is this? Like,
yeah. Hey, I didn't know it exists. You're saying it every day, NPR. And yeah, the majority of people who you're describing find it offensive. Don't care, which again is pretty rock and roll of NPR, actually. So rock and roll NPR for not caring about offending people. But no, it's like but of course, when it gets to segregation, you're like, well, again, to me, the categories alone are already sort of offensive, but then because you didn't consult anyone, but then you get to the realm of like, now you're going to do stuff about it. And it was like, you can't. I was like, that's specific. I was like, who? I feel like everyone would be offended. I would be offended if like a homeless person wasn't allowed to come in, regardless of reason. Houseless person wasn't allowed to come in and like buy a cup of coffee. If he's got $1, you know what I mean? And he's obeying your other, like whatever, if you have your shoe shirt service, which of course this whole thing's made me question, but if he's got the buck, he's got his $1.85, and then you said customers can use the restrooms, then I mean, you can put a time limit on restroom use. I'm autoimmune issue. I spend a lot of time in the bathroom. It should be a nice length of time. But I was like, he should be able to. That's a category we've been dealing with all sorts of, reasons and frights and dangers about.
Well, the shirt shoe policy is hilariously inadequate, based on my assumption of its intention to begin with. Unless it's like everything from between. I'm like, I really want somebody to just walk in without pants and be like, I got my shirt, I got my shoe. We're good.
Yeah, we're good. I'm in here like Winnie the Pooh with Crocs on. Yeah, should be cool.
One thing I wanted to dip back very briefly is I think you made a comment that the folks in some of these groups hadn't talked about it, and I wanted to just be specific because you are correct that there wasn't a lengthy discussion about all of these ideas, and certainly not ever in any thread I've ever seen talking about medical apartheid or anything like that. There was certainly a discussion about safety. It's food. There's the houseless work, and then there's like a lot of it's around food sovereignty. So it's
sure.
Let's just for simplicity say it's kind of like a food bank where we're getting together and we're in proximity with each other and we're packing food and delivering it and all that stuff. And in that way, yes, there was certainly a consensus in the way we operate. And I think this is one of the more beautiful things that is, operates around consensus, although we can pick that apart and say, who's really participating, blah, blah, blah. But yes, there's certainly, I do recall like a specific, like, hey, can we want to build consensus around COVID protocols and wearing masks, and specifically an N95, was a piece of it. And it felt, it's curious though. There's a couple things. One, I noticed a lot of folks showing up not with N95s, and I was even at one once, and just very gently, I bring extras because of course my parents buy them by the gross, so I have all these things, and I'm like, hey, I've got an N95. Do you want it? Yeah. And I just was as gentle as I could. I wasn't trying to be like, hey, it's we all agreed on this rule, and I don't know, it's not how I roll, but like. And he was like, no, I'm good. And he had one of those like really loose, and this is weird to me because they're medical masks, I think, but they're really loose. Yeah. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's very.
I'm like, what? So, and again, I mean, that's a whole question mark. I think I carry is just like, well, they wear masks in hospitals, and is that just to make patients feel better? But I don't think you're. Even earlier, you were specifically saying cloth masks, versus if there's any efficacy that's validated, it's with the N95s, right? And that variation.
Yeah, right? And even that very limited. Yeah, surgical masks in hospitals. Well, they don't wear surgical masks in hospitals. That's the thing I think we've forgotten as a society. Like I've been in many hospitals and people walking around prior to these mandates. No, people aren't wearing masks. Like people are walking around with their naked faces. I've seen doctors' faces, nurses' faces, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? You don't see masks except are you going to go get them? Oh, thank you, darling. I was still going to go. That helps me wrap up. But you can go if you want. I'm not preventing you in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we are at time.
No, but it's an interesting thing that like, whatever, they don't, other than in the surgical theater, that you don't wear masks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of interesting, but like again, it's all those signposts of perception, which I think radiate throughout a lot of the stuff we're discussing.
So there was a discussion, there was some version of consensus, like yes, let's wear masks, and yet to dig deeper, I don't know where even the initial proposal comes from. That's how consensus stuff works. Is like somebody proposes that and like enough people are yay
or nay
sure. Which in a fast moving kind of distributed, in often ways pretty chaotic environment, I mean, there's a high likelihood you're going to get a lot of thumbs up because people are just kind of like, yeah, sure, sounds good.
Fine, let's do it.
And so no, there was never, to my knowledge, and maybe it happened somewhere, but I don't recall, or I wasn't present to, like a deeper discussion about like, because the question is like, well, why did somebody think that that masks or vaccines or whatnot were safe? And I can only assume that's connected to more like mainstream and institutional, policies that were around. One thing I wanted to very really touch back on, and is you mentioned at one point like the crossing the street phenomenon and the walking around people.
Yeah.
And I mean, one thing I feel like even before we started chatting, I feel like I started seeing a lot of things quite a while ago that were like the chance of outdoor infection is just like next to nothing. Like
it was never a concern at any point in time.
Yeah. And so that was helpful for me. And I've been really present to that phenomenon of like walking, and I don't usually cross the street, but I'll like give somebody a wide berth, and I'll like, like the 6 feet thing, and I'll be like walking around people. And it was like, it just feels really odd and unneighborly to just sort of,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll be over here. Yeah.
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 You're fragrant with danger. Yeah.
So question, and this is the last thing that's building up for me is like where are we? You know, I actually looked up some numbers, you know, and just again in that super rolled up like high level thing. Because a friend of mine earlier this week was saying, who, you know, somebody I trust in a lot of ways, he was just like, look, half the world is still really, really and you know, hurting with COVID. And like in the US, we're kind of, at least in a lot of areas, I think coming out or in a lot of more of your experience, we never went in. But yeah, I'm just, is there a short answer to that? Like where the heck are we with this thing?
I mean, there's a phenomenal seasonality to it. That's always been the case with all respiratory illnesses. So people have been talking about that for 2 years, and the mainstream media has been talking about it for like 6 months, maybe. So yeah, we should be doing good because we're not indoors, cold weather style anymore. Which brings our immune system down and kind of beleaguers our system. So then we're more prone to infections taking hold. And also we're just indoors and around each other more. So yeah, when summer comes on, things tend to dip. We don't know with like preponderance of vaccinated people in Omicron and that negative efficacy, how that's going to play out necessarily. Because I've certainly anecdotally heard of people getting infected by Omicron multiple times, vaccinated people, like getting it 3-4 times over, you know, like 4-month period, 5-month period. But yeah, basically it's seasonal. And so then all the thing we have to do is be careful is then the next time it spikes, because it will, that we don't let them do all the terrible things again. So that's again why we have to have these conversations and recognize what worked or what didn't, and what's wicked, what's evil, what's good, because absolutely people will at least have a hankering to, if not coming down from on high, to start doing things again that we did before.
So your advice is we should all get vaccinated. We should all be socially isolated. We should all be, wait, I don't think I've learned
Those are, yeah, flip those upside down and then yes, absolutely.
I don't think I've learned anything today.
Yeah. No, this is good. I love hearing your perspective and being able to kind of sit in the middle of it and kind of push it around and mash it about and figure it out. And then I think there'll be more too. I do want to examine in a future different concept episode. I want to like look more at the spaces you're in and their regard for this. And I would like to use you as my proxy of weaponizing exactly that same sort of thinking. If anyone tries to divide us again, because I remain united with you, if no one else in this moment. I love you very much.
I'm united with you because Cobra Kai never dies.
I love you, Andy. It was great talking to you.
I love you too.
See
you soon.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Recording.